Hey everyone, it's Jack. What can I say about All-Stars 9 that hasn't already been said? Honestly, what can I say about All-Stars 9 in general? I've been having a hard time sitting down and recording a video on All-Stars 9. By no means is this a bad season. I just have a hard time really talking about anything going on because I just don't find a lot of what's happening super interesting. There are a good amount of moments in a vacuum that are incredible from this season. Some wonderful performances, and don't get me started on so many of these runways. I watch the episodes each week, but I'm not really enthusiastically sitting down to watch them. When I get to them, and I don't think that's the best outcome for a season like this. I think it is incredible that they're doing this for charity. There is so much money that are being pumped into these organizations. All of that is really great. And the Queen's getting a stipend for runways and just an appearance fee in general, also amazing. It's a huge step up from All-Stars 8 in a lot of ways, but I think a lot of people can agree that in light of it being a charity season and being a lot more positive, much of the stakes of the competition just aren't there, and that's what gets people to watch a lot of the time. Eliminations in these types of competition shows is what brings the momentum to the show. There's importance and stakes to the people who are sticking around. But I think what we've seen on All-Stars 7 and All-Stars 9 now is that, especially in the midpoint of the season, it seems like the drive to compete and stay on top and win these challenges is just not as present, because they're gonna be there the next week. And even if they do have that drive every time, it's really hard to emulate that in a season that's trying to be so positive. The character arcs of the season basically boil down to someone like Georges being like, oh, I'm not funny, and then being like, oh wait, I am funny. Moving on. Being in the bottom up for elimination in Drag Race and being able to fight and then rebound and win a challenge, that is a much easier story to tell than someone who just isn't in the bottom and gets some kind of negative critiques, but we don't even really see them because the edit of the season is just too positive. Of course, we're only halfway through the season, so there is a lot of time for character arcs to build. But in a regular season, we get a final climactic moment for the queens who are in the top. The season is building and building to the point where they're the only queens left. Even if there is attention focused on other queens on the season, eventually those queens are eliminated, and we naturally focus in on the frontrunners of the competition, making for a really satisfying storyline at the end. While here, they have to balance basically everyone's screen time and storyline for the whole season. At points, people can be on the back burner, but by the end, they kind of have to have a satisfying conclusion for everyone. And that's both hard to do from a filming aspect, but also just the competition aspect when there are no bottom placements. And what Alaska said recently, I think, is really accurate. She goes into detail about how some of the queens know that this isn't their episode to shine, so subconsciously they often check out because they know that this isn't their episode to win, or they know that someone else is getting focused in on a lot more, so sometimes they just aren't as attentive to the camera. Eliminations are progressions for the viewer, but it's also progression for the people who are actually competing because less people equals closer to the crown. But when it's the middle of the season, some queens are clearly pulling ahead and you don't really see yourself shining in this specific challenge or episode, it's really hard to stay on top in these filming conditions because you're already tired. All in all, I think non-elimination on paper is a cool idea that can work out in some circumstances. I think it worked out a lot better on All-Star 7 because it was a much more novel concept, but I truly think we'd see viewership drop off a cliff if this was the standard format for the show. Them doing it this season, I think, is fine. It's great for just this season, but otherwise, I really hope it doesn't stick around. At the time of recording this, we are at episode 7, and the one thing that's really keeping me invested is the snipping storyline between Angeria, Roxy, and now kind of Got Mick. I do want to balance out some of the negative critiques because that storyline is the one storyline that I think they're telling really well over the course of the season. The snipping storyline going from an eye for an eye to the dramatics of Roxy to the dramatics of Angeria to now Got Mick being cut off because I honestly think that is a smart decision. I do hope the queens are able to play it up without it really affecting them and their mental in the competition. We saw that Mick was already kind of low energy and down the past couple weeks, so I don't know how the snip is really going to affect her. Regardless though, I think the snipping has already made more of an impact than the Platinum Plunger. The Vivian was upset in All-Star 7, but that was more so just for the camera and to create conflict to make something interesting, and maybe they'll do it again here. It's a really fun storyline overall, and I hope it gets the proper completion that it deserves. And this episode in particular told the snipping storyline super well. We didn't know if Angeria or Roxy were immediately going to cut each other off again if they got in the top. Plastique was putting her 2 cents in there and it ended up working in her favor, and honestly her logic is pretty sound. So this was a great pinpoint to the snipping storyline. I just wish this type of non-elimination format had a better progression overall. It's Jack. About a week later, I decided to postpone this video until this week's episode came out, and yeah, I think it was the right decision because we got a conclusion to the snipping storyline. With Angeria being snipped again and snipping being done on the season, it is now clear that this is a a Roxy versus Angeria storyline. But with these two being frontrunners, it feels like a storyline between these two for who's going to take the crown at the end. It's been a very interesting ride with this, and for a season with very little storyline overall, I think this was a great storyline to have. You never really know with All-Stars though. I think having frontrunners in a season is almost like scary to the producers, so I'm assuming that these two will make the top 3, but I still don't know. One of them might get screwed over in some way. I feel like I'm talking in circles a little bit. Let's move on to the cast, the challenges, and the runways. The cast of All-Stars 9 is really interesting, and I think each of them really serve a certain purpose for being cast. Chanel is definitely the most self-explanatory. She is the OG queen to first walk in the workroom, and having OG representation is really important for these modern seasons. I feel like Roxy was definitely cast for the fans more than anything else. She's built such a stan culture around her since like All-Stars 2. Georges and Angeria were the season 14 reps, which was also probably the most viable season to cast for at that point and like the newest season. And I think these two especially, along with Gottmik and Miss Vanjie, serve as RuPaul's favorites, just kind of in the Drag Race franchise in general. I feel like with All-Stars 8 and 9, the queens who are getting cast from these more modern seasons are RuPaul's favorite. People like Heidi, Lala, Candy, Georges, Angeria. RuPaul really enjoys these queens and goes on and on about them. Miss Vanjie and Gottmik also serve as queens who have been successful outside of the show. And we can also add Nita West and especially Plastique to that list too. So putting all of these queens together, we have some OG picks, we have some fan favorites, and they're all wildly successful in different ways, and I think Drag Race wanted to highlight that by bringing all of them back. So I think if they were given an elimination season, it would be really interesting and cutthroat. But instead, this year we're highlighting the charity aspect and how successful these queens are. It's just not really what we expect out of All-Stars and a competitive reality show. It kind of seems like the competition is not really the main priority, and that's okay, especially when it is all being played for charity. It just overall makes it harder to talk about the actual season, but there's still a lot of good moments in there, so let's get to the challenges. While I didn't particularly love the end product of the acting challenge this week, I thought the actual filming process and the end of Rue's part was really great. People were saying no one really did that great this week, and I think that's more to do with the constant referencing and the writing, and I totally get they were doing parodies and making reference to iconic movies, but when the scenes were that short, it kind of made it hard for everyone to stand out. I thought the roast was pretty good and Snatch Game was pretty good. Property Queens I don't really have an opinion on, but if we're talking about great challenges, let's talk about the makeover and the paintball. If this season is going to get remembered for anything, it's going to be Runways. There are just so many great runway queens this season, and this season also has queens with just great makeup skills too. I feel like every week I see a post of Vanjie going viral for how amazing she looks. Doing a girl group paired makeover is such an All-Stars level concept, and I think the product was just delivered so well, and I love that song. That was probably my favorite episode of the season so far. This episode where they just recorded with Rue is also really great, but I just didn't like the overall product. We'll talk about the ball in a second when I talk about the runways, but I want to touch on the first episode of the season and this song. From the start, I was with Katya when listening to this song. It's almost too on the nose for me, but that's like the prompt they were given. I don't blame the queens. I just think it was a really interesting choice by production to do a song like this. I totally understand why they chose to do it because it is a charity season and what's going on in the world is really big. The constant attack on drag is something that we are still dealing with today, and Drag Race was kind of thrown into the forefront of that movement, whether they like it or not. So they've been responding with things like Wig Loose and Power, and now Drag Queen Save the World. I want to say I think Wig Loose did it the best, but overall Drag Race is kind of forced to put out responses to these things, but in a way that's still entertaining, which kind of throws out a lot of the nuance and complexities in situations like this. They're not bad, they're inoffensive, but I think what's going to be more impactful is when a queen is able to show their own art or just talk about their own story, much more than just a blanketed statement about voting or drag queen saving the world. And that could just be a me thing. Personally, I don't really like empowerment anthems that much. What resonates with me about movements is when I hear a person's story, not when I hear their verse about wearing that crown and strutting that stuff or having a teeny waist and a huge empire. And let me tell you, I do find them catchy and I still do listen to them, but zooming out a little bit, I just can't really get behind these types of songs. So what stories am I talking about? I think one of the most impactful moments on the season, a moment that has stuck with me since I saw it, and just a perfect example of what I value about Drag Race till this day. Gottmik's Tail and Two Titties runway is incredible. It has an incredible message, it's beautiful, it's the right amount of gory, and it's all in a way to start an important conversation that Gottmik chose to do. You just feel the impact so much more because it's not manufactured in any type of way. Mick saw the prompt and chose to do this runway, and it got people talking from every side of the spectrum. And this is everything that Drag Race can be, and more importantly, what drag is. You can get a conversation going, you go against the grain. You make people feel that slightest bit of uneasiness because they're not used to seeing things like this, and then you're able to spin it into a teaching moment. I want to do a full video on impactful runways like this, because anytime I see a runway like this, so much is just rejuvenated in me. But let's talk about other runways from this season, like Plastique's ball look, or the rest of Plastique's looks, or the rest of Got Mixed looks. These two are definitely in a race to have the best runway package of any Drag Race season. That's definitely another video I want to do because their packages, along with like some of the season 16 packages, we're seeing such amazing drag this year. And it goes to show that if you give queens a stipend for runways, their runways are going to turn out great. And it's now what I'm looking forward to most out of anything on the season. That's not knocking the challenges, I just think the runways have been incredible. All in all, All Stars 9 has its problems. It's mostly to do with the format, but I think they're learning from that already. I don't think this format is going to be sticking around, so if we're just having it for this year, I guess I'll enjoy it while it lasts. It's all for charity at the end of the day, and though there can still be valid criticisms for the structure of the show, I'm not going to be too mad at that. I'll probably do another video at the end of the season if anything major changes or they do some BS twist, because Drag Race is still known to do that for every All-Star season. I really hope they've learned from the 3 stars twist and they don't do something like that again, but you never know. Support all the queens on the season, support their charities that they're fighting for. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon with another video.